Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for showing up tonight. We're very excited with the presentation that we have to offer. Um, I'm Bethany Moffi. I'm serving as the interim chair. Just to establish a couple of norms, everyone, we're all here to support students in the district with special needs. Please keep an open mind and be respectful with everyone else. If you can, put where your child goes to school and what grade level they are, just so we know who's out there. So your child or children's grade levels and what school they go to in the chat, just so we can get a sense of who's out there. Just a couple of announcements of upcoming meetings. On February 27th, we're going to do dyslexia, reading comprehension, and BPS equitable literacy. On March 27th, we are going to present on extended school year, fifth quarter, and internship programs. On April 24th, we're going to present on autism supports and services. And on May 22nd, we're going to discuss transition options for students, and we will hold our board elections. There'll be many, many seats open, including the seat of chair. So we'll post available seats on our website and in our newsletters, but please do consider running for a seat. And we will also repost the meeting topics. Just wanted to give you a heads up. Tonight's presentation is going to be from Kevin Simon, MD, MPH, and it is Therapeutic Services Supporting Social, Emotional, and Behavioral Well-Being in Students. And following the presentation will be a question and answer session. We'll be taking questions from the chat and from the Zoom, and we will just be alternating one question from Zoom, one question from the chat. If you're on Zoom and you're asking a question, you can choose to show your video or not. We will call on individuals with their Zoom hands raised. So take a look at the bottom of your screen. If you aren't familiar with it, look for where the raised hand symbol is. And if you have a question, just raise your Zoom hand. The chat is also available for communication to all participants. If you don't feel comfortable asking a question on Zoom, please put your question in the chat. And again, we'll alternate back and forth. There are people here from the Office of Specialized Services to provide more information on supports and practices on what the presenter will be talking about within BPS. The meeting is going to wrap at 8:30 to respect everyone's time. So at 8:15, we'll take the last question, and it's very possible that we won't get to all the questions. So if we do not get to your question, please put it in the chat with your name and your email, and we will make sure that your question gets to the right party and that you get a response. And then lastly, this is a parent meeting and a family meeting, and we're so excited that you're all here with us today. We are parents, we are family, we're all doing this together. If you are a BPS employee, we ask that you allow families to have their questions answered first by the presenter. And if you have clarification or if you are asked specifically to respond to a question, to respond then. If you're a BPS employee, but you're here as a family member, then please try to keep your questions related to family perspective. And we do ask that everyone try to keep their questions general rather than specific to their specific case. That way we can answer, we can provide more answers for more families. Thank you again so much for showing up tonight. Without further ado, let's welcome your facilitator for the evening, SpEdPAC Treasurer, Edith Bazile.
Thank you, Bethany. I really appreciate that introduction, and thank you everyone for being here. I just want to set the context for our discussion about therapeutic services and give you a little bit of data around what's happening in BPS and what our therapeutic services and settings looks like. I don't have up-to-date data. This data is from Aspen data from the year 2020, 2021. I did ask for current data, but I didn't receive it. I imagine that this data is somewhere around the ballpark of where it was about 4 years ago. So in BPS, 12.8% of BPS students are identified as having an emotional impairment, compared to 4.9% nationally and 9.6% statewide. In 2020, 2021, Black males had a risk of 3.63, almost 4%, which means that Black males were almost 4 times more likely to be in a substantially separate behavior-based classroom than any other student demographic. 32% of BPS's students with disabilities were in substantially separate settings, while both the state and the national average is 13%. I wanted to set that context so that you have a little bit of information of what the landscape of BPS is and why there is such a need for change, but also a need to ensure that students who require therapeutic services receive those services and what those services are. So thinking about that, I also want to add that we're thankful that we have 2 special guests, Dr. Miller, who is the Assistant Superintendent for the Mel King Academies. The Mel King Academies are 3 schools which are therapeutic in-district schools. And we also have Corey McCarthy, who is the Chief of Student Services, and we're really thankful to have them here. I want to tell you a little bit about our presenter, Dr. Kevin Simon, before he starts. Dr. Kevin Simon is Boston's first Chief Behavioral Health Officer, appointed by Mayor Wu. He's leading a citywide behavioral health strategy to address Boston's growing mental health needs through the Boston Public Health Commission. Dr. Simon is a polymath, a physician, a scientist, a healthcare policy expert, and he's also an inspirational teacher, as well as a gifted writer. He is an attending psychiatrist at Boston Children's Hospital, an assistant professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, a former Commonwealth Fund fellow in the health policy at Harvard University, and a healthcare policy and systems consultant. His writings on health equity are in notable journals like the New England Journal of Medicine. National audiences regularly see his perspectives on mental health through trusted outlets, and this is one of them. Dr. Simon is not new to us. He has presented to SpEdPAC in the past, and he's back upon popular demand. And so it is my pleasure and my honor to welcome the esteemed Dr. Kevin Simon. And I'll turn this presentation over to him. His presentation is going to be about 45 minutes, followed by a question and answer session. Thank you. Dr. Simon.
Yeah, well, one, thank you for that very nice introduction, Edith. And thank you to everyone that's afforded me the opportunity to engage with you all this evening. So despite Edith's nice intro of myself, I'm going to introduce myself. We're going to touch on ADHD, social emotional learning, therapeutic services. Truth of the matter is, any one of these topics in it by themselves is more than 45 minutes worth. So we're going to try to get through a lot of information, but also want to leave a pretty ample amount of time for caregivers. I'm just going to identify for those caregivers to ask their questions. And I presume that everyone can hear me appropriately, and that hopefully everyone is in the respective interpretation room that you should be in. All right, so I'm going to share my screen, and this is the first of, in essence, 2 presentations that you'll see today. And so just for context, my role, this is a disclosure, just letting you know that the experiences that I've had make it such that I have biases. We all have biases because we're human beings. But I try to be mindful of that. And I try to stay in a learning frame. In reference to the presentation, and I'm going to take it that Edith is going to keep me on task in terms of timing. we'll do introductions with myself, talk about social neurodevelopmental conditions, most commonly ASD and ADHD, and then talk about resources that are available to persons who live in Boston, and then leave time for question and answer. And despite the fact that Edith just shared a nice intro of me, who am I? So my parents are from Haiti. Hopefully there's some Haitian folks here or Caribbean folks that are in the audience. My mom's from Gonaive. My dad is from Bazile. They didn't know each other at the time, but their families helped them migrate when they were teens to New York. And so they had me. This is actually me. I'm not embarrassed to show my like 1-year-old self. My parents still live in the same house in Brooklyn. I have 2 sisters, Michelle and Natasha. I'm going to use a laser just so that way folks can see. That's Michelle. She lives on my right. And that's Natasha. She lives on my left. My dad is Deacon Moclair Simon. He was the 3rd African-American deacon in the Archdiocese. But also he was a New York City public school teacher for 25 years. And then towards the tail end of his career there, he got a master's in social work. So he currently leads grief counseling services for Catholic charities in New York City. So folks who engage in teaching want their young people to be better students. I have a very fond heart for. My mom is Leedy. She's awesome. She keeps the house running a cord. So that's my nuclear family. I have a newish nuclear family. That's my wife, Dr. Halford. She's an internist at Beth Israel. Sometimes we get dressed up. A lot of times we don't because of these 2 people, Brooke and KJ. More appropriate photo. Brooke, she's 6. KJ, he's 3.5. So that's my nuclear family. I'm sharing them with you in part. Why listen to me, irrespective of what Edith said? It's because I also was a kid. I have kids. And the reality is that we should all be trying to figure out how to help each other best. So I'm trying to just share with you that even though we're virtual, I very much want to be as helpful as possible for those who have young people in BPS. Things that I'm going to say aren't really all of just my own accord. I have a lot of mentors and sponsors. We won't spend too much time here. Dr. Ojukutu, she's the commissioner for our city public health commission. But I have a lot of mentors. Some look like me, some don't look like me. Truth of the matter is, if we're going to be moving in the right direction, we have to engage with people that sometimes agree with things that we say, sometimes don't agree with things that we say. All right, so I met Mayor Wu a couple of years ago. She asked me if I could help Boston. She really didn't ask that question, but it makes it a good question to ask. And I'm also gonna be mindful that we have an interpreter, so I'll talk slower at times. But she did ask what my thoughts are in reference to behavioral health for the city. And I suspect many of you would agree that things could be better. Things for a long time could be better, not just in Boston, but many places. And so there's a frame of reference that I have thinking about the social determinants of mental health. And so we're focused on school, yet school is just one location that can positively or negatively impact students' ability to learn. And so all of these boxes, we won't go through each one of them, do impact how our students and learners engage, and also how we as parents and teachers engage, right? And so if you're in a place where there is neighborhood disorder, or Chinatown, for instance, has less tree canopies. So when it's heat waves, Chinatown actually gets hotter than other parts of the city. All of these things actually can positively or negatively impact how our students show up and when they're there. And that we have to be very mindful of that as educators. And so we'll just keep going. So in reference to things that I've thought about and have had teams, disparities as it pertains to youth in regards to mental and behavioral health, particularly boys of color, substance use disorder, girls of color, substances again. So you can pin in the back of your mind, if you have a question about ADHD, ASD, cannabis, vaping, etc., you can feel free to write it down or put it in the chat, and I will try to answer those questions for you. 2 years ago, at the city level, we formed a Center for Behavioral Health and Wellness. And it's a center that, in essence, coordinates with other city entities. So CBHW, Center for Behavioral Health and Wellness, it's within the Boston Public Health Commission, which is made up of multiple bureaus, and then the big city of Boston, BPS, BPD, BPL, like Boston Public Library. We work collaboratively to figure out how to best improve behavioral health services. So for us, we're going to think about school, but I can tell you, we didn't just come up with this idea on our own. There were several community health needs assessments, and for the prior 3 community health needs assessments, mental health was one of the top 3 issues that constituents raised. And when within mental health, youth behavioral health was one of the top 3 things within the mental health concern. And so increasing the number of behavioral health workers that are diverse, people want to know about what resources are or aren't available, and then can we start providing youth with pro-social activities. So I just wanted to highlight that last year we did acknowledge a $21 million student support behavioral health effort, and it will be over 5 years. Hopefully over those 5 years, there'll be roughly 50,000 BPS students that are aided, and will be in many different schools. And so how are you going to recognize some of these initiatives? We created several sets of like RFPs, or requests for proposals. So one was for expanding the behavioral health workforce, and that was secured through University of Massachusetts, Boston. That will support roughly 200 Boston residents who are diverse to pursue behavioral health careers. Actively have a public mental health campaign called Heads Up. Trauma-informed school system transformation is pairing with 10 BPS schools. And then more recently, we have this enhancing behavioral health capacity, which is actually improving the ability of those who engage with youth but aren't clinicians be better comfortable when youth bring up mental health concerns. So this is high level. I'm just giving you examples of things that we're attempting to do. Because when you're trying to make a change around things that perhaps historically have been underinvested, it takes a long time. So just giving you high level here. Last year, we did publish a State of Boston mental health report that highlights activities as it pertains to our high school students, and particularly those findings that we found increasing anxiety, particularly for BIPOC youth, particularly for those who are gender and sexual minorities. And so we're going to start addressing that. And while we're here, I want everyone to feel encouraged as a learner. Number one, you can ask questions. Asking questions is actually how we learn. You can't, if you don't ask questions, information will go right by. I don't know everything. Actually, probably only know here. And we all have to be comfortable knowing what we know. I don't know everything. So if I don't have an answer, I'm just going to be transparent and say, oh, I can figure that answer out for you and get you that information, which I'll give to Edith. Earlier, you talked about relating to peers. We're all here for the same reasons. Truth is, when we're kind with each other, it actually helps the recipient of who you're kind to. And interesting enough, we actually undervalue our ability to make other people feel good. I'm moving fast in part so I can get to the ASD and ADHD. And so something that we should be mindful of, whether we're engaging with a teacher or a student, we only know, literally where my laser is, we only know a small bit about what someone is experiencing. And I think that that's critically important when thinking about how parents might engage with teachers, how teachers might engage with young people, how young people might engage with teachers. We're only seeing a facet of somebody's like experience when we're engaged with them. And last thing, we have to be able to make mistakes. It's actually the only way we learn. Right? Learn from theory. So learn from someone talking to you, learn from practice, or learn from mistakes. And hopefully in our classrooms, and this is actually critically important to social emotional learning, we create spaces that don't have low psychological safety, i.e., you're afraid to ask questions because you don't want to be perceived as not knowing as much as the next student. You want to create spaces that have high psychological safety. And so, when I'm teaching students, I encourage all of them to ask as many questions as possible. And we have to break our bias towards those students who get answers quote unquote right, and bias ourselves towards, wait, we want to see everyone asking questions. So I have one more slide in reference to introduction about myself, then we're going to pivot quickly to the neurodevelopmental conditions. And because we are on a computer, there we go. So this is my dad. He does all of our services. So this is him walking me down the aisle. And when I took this role, he wrote me a letter. I'm going to read the letter to you because I try to keep it mindful with all the things I do. It says, "Baby K, peace be unto you and your household. As I reflect on your accomplishments for the past few years, I want to tell you how proud I am of you. Since you're in a new position, I beg you to always be nice to people you come in contact with. Be considerate. Do your work with transparency and keep your integrity until you go down to your grave. I've seen people losing all they worked for in their life for stupid things they do at their work. Love your children and your wife as you love yourself, and the Lord, who knows the heart of all, will reward you." Montclair. So that's me, but now we're going to pivot, and I'm going to bring up a different screen. Now we're going to pivot to neurodevelopmental conditions. And hopefully you're now seeing a slide that says goals to provide resources and references for caregivers, to review clinical practice guidelines from the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. So hopefully you feel empowered as caregivers with information so you can best support the learners in your life. And some of the resources that I'm using and will be speaking from are from our national medical societies. All right, so what is ADHD? ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder that affects a person's ability to regulate behavior, attention, and emotions. And so what are the signs, right? Is this kid have ADHD because he's grabbing the doctor's stethoscope? Is it that this person cannot focus, thinking about the text message, thinking about the to-do list? Is it that this person is struggling to do the homework assignment? Is it that this person has too many ideas? It could be all of these. The next slide is going to have two sets of lists that actually characterize the symptoms and how we as providers suggest somebody has hyperactive or inattentive or combination. So there are hyperactive symptoms and impulsive symptoms, or there's inattentive symptoms. You need to have, or a young person needs to have 6 out of 9 of these things. And although this is a list, and undoubtedly you could look at this list and say, wait a minute, I have some of these things. When we're thinking about kids, it's do 6 out of 9 of these symptoms present themselves in multiple domains of their life. So ADHD doesn't turn off. And so the symptoms should be present at home, at school, at camp, on the soccer team, in the library, grandma's house. It's going to show up many places. So we're going to walk through hyperactive and impulsive presentation. So when often fidgety or restless, the person often has difficulty remaining seated. And again, not just in class, seated at grandma's house, seated on the bus, seated in the car. Often runs or climbs excessively, often has difficulty engaging in activities quietly, right? Now, that's not to say that kids can't ever be quiet, but difficulty remaining quiet for a sustained period of time, let's just say 15 minutes, often acts as if driven by a motor or is on the go, often talks excessively, and not just chatty, but chatty so much that it actually, the person blurts out answers. It's like, oh, wait, Kevin, I didn't even finish the question yet. Often has difficulty waiting in turn or waiting their turn, right? And so overtly, I've called on Dr. Miller, yet Kevin wants to raise his hand. It's like, well, Kevin, I called on Dr. Miller. Often interrupts or intrude upon others. And so maybe parents are talking and the kid wants to jump in and interrupt the conversation, or mom is talking to grandma, kid wants to jump in. If there's 6 out of 9 of these, and again, in multiple domains of the child's life, perhaps there's some concern about hyperactive or impulsive presentation. If we look at the right side of the screen and look at inattentive presentation, needs 6 out of 9 again, often fails to give close attention to detail, makes careless mistakes, difficulty sustaining attention. And the classic example here is you give a child, and so when I say child, this school-age person, a set of 10 math questions that they actually can answer, not ones they can't, but ones they can answer. But it's going to take a little bit of effort. They don't get through the 10, they get to 6, and then all of a sudden, I got to use the bathroom, they got to get up. The attention is deficit, it's not sustainable. So they often do struggle to follow instructions because they actually haven't listened to all of the instructions or read all of the instructions. Can at times appear to be not listening. Yet when you ask them a question, they can entirely tell you what it is that you were saying. They just appear as though they're not paying attention. Struggle with organization, often avoids or dislikes tasks requiring sustained mental effort. And so this is where if somebody starts to get treatment, they can start to read chapter books where previously they couldn't read chapter books. Often loses things necessary for tasks, often easily distracted, often forgetful in daily activities. So it's like, honey, we always take our shoes off at the front of the steps. Despite you say that every day is like a new day. And so if there's 6 out of 9 of these, you'd say that the person has inattentive symptoms. If there's 6 out of 9 on the inattentive symptoms and 6 out of 9 in the hyperactive, you'd actually say combined. But now, here's the question. If a person has the symptoms, does that mean that they actually have ADHD? Well, the presence of ADHD symptoms alone is actually not enough to receive the diagnosis of ADHD. Symptoms must be present in more than one setting, or I say domains of more than one setting, usually both in home and school. And the child must have some sort of clinical impairment. Classically, clinical impairment for a school-age child is that they're struggling in school. And so on the questionnaires, the Vanderbilt is the most common questionnaire. It's going to ask about reading, mathematics, and oftentimes if there's a struggle there, plus you have these 6 out of 9 symptoms, a provider might more likely say, oh, I think your child meets criteria for ADHD. And so again, ADHD symptoms are displayed on a continuum. It is possible for a person to show some symptoms and yet not meet full criteria. Because again, you can have 6 out of 9, but somehow, some way, because of the school and the environment that you're in, we're not actually seeing deficits in academic ability. Now, how do symptoms of ADHD, and of note, I could also say ASD here, affect a child's life? And so, high level, peer relationships, physically intrusive. They're touchy, they butt into others' activities, they insist on their own way, they sometimes miss social cues, they have difficulty seeing other people's point of view. And then again, this is for both ADHD and for autism spectrum disorder. And then they have difficulty ignoring provocation, i.e., yes, I'm going to make a name up, little Joe is annoying. Don't pay attention to him. Individuals that are on the neurodivergent spectrum have far more difficulty actually disengaging, in part because that's how their mind is made up. Adult relationships, both teachers and parents, end up being more challenging because poor parent-child and teacher-child interactions. Why? Because we have more frequent redirection and poor compliance with commands. And so you as the caregiver end up having a lower frustration tolerance because that child is the one that you have to continuously remind or correct. And so it's important as a provider to be able to remind the parent that you are the scaffold, you are the executive functioning for your child far longer when they have a neurodivergent condition than quote unquote a neurotypical child. And so for academics, there's going to be greater difficulty tracking school supplies. So don't be surprised. You got to buy 3-4 packs of pens and pencils. And then leisure activities, they kind of sometimes struggle in team sports in the beginning because they have difficulty following game rules, taking turns, impulsive behavior. And so what have some researchers found out or developed theories around in terms of ADHD? And this is the one I think, if you're going to remember anything from today, hopefully there's a lot of things, but this would be one. Because parents will say, well, how come they can play, their PS box or their PlayStation? How come they can play the video game for as long as they can? Folks with ADHD and folks with ASD have difficulty maintaining attention when completing their perceived boring task, what we call cool executive function. And so if it's not exciting, like perhaps reading or mathematics or sitting down to listen, that is going to cause them frustration. Simultaneously, they have difficulty problem solving and being flexible when emotionally aroused. And so when they're hot, it's actually the worst time to try to be telling them what to do. You have to actually give them time to emotionally cool down. And this often comes up because, again, parents will wonder, well, how come they can engage in certain activities and be seemingly focused? But the truth of the matter is when we think about school settings require, yes, for us to sometimes engage in the activity that we want, which might be play, it might be the science class, but then there's going to be a necessity to engage in a boring activity because that's just life. There are things that are exciting, and then there are things that are boring. We have to be able to manage both ends of the spectrum. All right. Children with ADHD are at increased risk of developing other psychological challenges. And so this is why you would want to get management early to mitigate the risk of developing other psychological challenges. So the most common ones, learning disabilities, about 25% of students or young people with ADHD are going to present with a learning disability. Anxiety disorders, about 25%. of those that have ADHD have an anxiety disorder. And classically, anxiety is treated with cognitive behavioral therapy plus or minus medications. Mood disorders, so like bipolar disorder, again, these can be treated with therapy plus or minus medications. Tic disorder, which is in about 10%. And then actually, autism spectrum disorder. 26% of those who have autism have ADHD. So it's very common that when you see or you have a young person, I say see it because referencing when I talk to providers, but as a young person or as a caregiver, if you have a child that has autism, there's a good chance that they do also have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And then if you have someone whom you do not believe you have autism, but you are somewhat certain that there are ADHD symptoms, it's still important if they're on the younger side, so 5, 6, 7 years old, that the provider screen for autism. And so these are just important statistics to know. What can help my child manage their ADHD? So we have behavioral parent training. So although parents do not cause ADHD, you don't cause autism. Parents can help manage their child's ADHD and autism, and parenting can actually affect how neurodivergent youth experience the world. We do have some behavioral classroom contingency management strategies. So again, teachers don't cause ADHD, teachers don't cause neurodivergency. However, teachers and the environment in which the learner is in can positively or negatively affect their experience while being neurodivergent. There are medications. So the medications here are in reference to ADHD, which are stimulants and non-stimulants. I'm going to show you a list in a few slides. For ASD or autism spectrum disorder, you may require a stimulant in the event that the person, again, has a co-occurring ADHD with autism. But for autism, we have only a few FDA-indicated medications. That's aripiprazole, risperidone, and Haldol. And those are FDA approved for irritability associated with ASD. And so here, this is where you would want to engage with your child psychiatrist or pediatrician or your developmental pediatrician to be nuanced about which medication might be best for my child. There are things that you can do, organizational skill training, and then behavior peer interventions. Something that I didn't list here, but is available for those that have ASD is ABA therapy or applied behavioral analyst therapy. And so it's a multimodal dynamic that you're going to need when you have a neurodivergent child. How does your provider actually diagnose ADHD? So you got to have a parent interview and a child interview, clinical interview. And then there are some standard behavioral rating scales. And so the Vanderbilt is the one that you're likely going to hear most about because it's free. The Connors, the provider and the system that the provider is a part of would have to pay for that. And so the Connors, it's a well-validated, and so the parent fills it out. It's a questionnaire. You can give a copy to the teacher or to a school person that engages with your child. They would fill it out, and then you provide that to the provider, plus they would do that clinical interview. And so that clinical interview should be about 40 minutes. And that's different than, say, a neuropsychological evaluation. Neuropsychological evaluations can be helpful. They're not necessary to diagnose ADHD. They are not necessary to diagnose autism spectrum disorder. but they can be helpful if there are other questions in addition to identifying the particular diagnosis. So in terms of the evaluation, and I just said this, psychological testing, if academic impairment seems unrelated to ADHD or in addition to it. So you can get neuropsych testing or psychoeducational testing, but it may not necessarily be necessary. And then again, further workup, speech language assessment. And so here I'll give you an example. So you have a 4-year-old who's in preschool, and classically, autism spectrum disorder is identified earlier than ADHD. But at home, maybe there's questions that the parent has about the 3-year-old. But then when the 3-year-old isn't with other students, it's like, oh, I get this, I or the teacher recognize that my child doesn't do parallel play, i.e. engage with other kids as smoothly as I would anticipate. Why might they want to do a speech and language assessment? Is it that my child isn't, responding to me when I call them because they actually can't hear appropriately? Or is it because they can hear appropriately, but there is a neurodevelopmental condition going on? And so classically, when you're in the three-year-old, you're introducing them to early learning education, and they start engaging with peers. The potential concerns that parents had but didn't know they were as significant concerns as they could have been because they only had the child and themselves. When they're with other peers, that's where it tends to be that parents really recognize. I can say, and so Edith referenced some statistics in regards to disparities. BIPOC youth often have delays in accurate diagnoses for neurodevelopmental conditions. And so it is prudent and incumbent upon parents and friends of parents to try to best present the information to the provider. But unfortunately, the literature would suggest that for both neurodevelopmental conditions, ADHD, ASD, there are delays in diagnoses. I myself have seen individuals 9, 10 years old presenting to me for quote unquote behavioral concerns. And then when I meet with the parents, I'm like, anyone brought the idea up of ASD? And they're like, well, we thought about it, but no one kind of further investigated, only to find out, no, your child meets criteria for ASD. And the earlier you identify the conditions, the earlier you get behavioral intervention and treatment, the better the likelihood of engaging your system. And I'm just identifying that my wife is texting me. All right. ABC model of behavior. This is for both at home and at school. At home and at school. So what is it? Antecedents, behaviors, consequences. Antecedents, behaviors, consequences. Undoubtedly, there are people here who know antecedents, behavior, and consequences. So what is that really? Antecedents. So we're talking about the situations that occur right before the behavior, right? And so setting, situation, contact with the person, and then the behavior. It's something that's specific, observable, measurable, and then the consequence. What happens immediately after the behavior? Why am I talking about ABCs of behavior? Is actually what you would potentially do, whether you're a teacher trying to shift the behavior in your classroom, or a parent, caregiver trying to shift the behavior at home. And so in the parent management training that is available, we might identify, okay, what's the behavior that you want to see shifted? I'll give you one that I hear about all the time. My child does not sleep on time. Okay, you want to change that behavior. How are you going to do that? Well, let me tell you the normal, kind of a normal example. You want your child to sleep at 9 o'clock. They're playing the video game. It's 9 o'clock. I'm going to make the child named Kevin. Kevin, go to sleep. just one more game, mom, one more game. One more game turns into two more games. Two more games turns into three more games. Does Kevin eventually go to sleep? Yes. But at what time? At 11 o'clock. Now, what has happened here? The behavior that you want to see change is Kevin go to sleep earlier. Now you and Kevin fussed. So what did that get? That got Kevin attention from you because you were engaging. And when kids are younger, all attention is well welcomed, good or bad. But you saw the desired behavior was not what you wanted. So we might make a suggestion of, okay, we know the antecedent. The trigger is getting Kevin off of the video game. So what are you going to do? We're going to put an overtly large clock to say, Kevin, we're going to get off the game not at 9 o'clock. We're going to get off the game at 8:30. And you tell Kevin well before he even starts playing the game, so that way you're priming him to know, oh, 8:30. Alarm clock goes off. All right, now you're going to calmly, as a caregiver, neutrally say, okay, honey, time to get off the game. Now, I'm going to be frustrated by this in the beginning. And that frustration is what we call extinction burst. Classically, when a parent is trying to put in an intervention, and I see your hand raised, Yaslund, when a parent is trying to engage a behavior or engage in intervention to shift the behavior is going to worsen, let's just say the first week. Classically, parents might, what we say, capitulate, or they are okay going back to the behavior because it is distressing to, one, see your child frustrated, you feeling that frustration. But if you hold on to the neutrality of maintaining the behavior or maintaining the intervention to shift the behavior, eventually Kevin might actually start to feel comfortable with the idea that, oh, dad is really holding me to this at 8:30 is the time I have to get off, and he gets off. The same thing can be done in school, right? And so what are some interventions? And I'm going to pause myself in part. Someone did politely raise their hand. Whoever raised their hand, if you can come off mute to ask your question.
Well, we were actually going to wrap up at 8 and have questions, so.
Oh, yeah,
wanna
okay.
continue.
Let me
So
just
we have
finish.
a few more moments.
Yes, let me just finish a couple of things. So treatments, so they vary by age in terms of first line versus second line. So if you're in preschool, first line is actually parent-based and therapy-based. So preschool 4 to 5-year-old first line evidence parent-based. You can consider medication if the parent reportedly has actually engaged all of the interventions. You can consider medication at that young of an age. For school age, first line treatment is actually medication. In part, it becomes much harder when your child's not present with you all the time. And so the medications can be far more helpful to help the environment at school and also help the environment at home. And we have a lot of medications. Same thing for adolescents. I'm just moving fast so that way we get through each slide. There's a lot of parent-based trainings that are available. And we talked about the antecedents. So some things that school systems can do, right? So having certain kids sitting near the front of the classroom, individually command is given to the child after a classroom-wide command. For some kids, extremely large visual cues, letting your child know ahead of time, or letting the child know ahead of time when transitions are going to occur. There are things that we can do for consequences. And I'm going to give these slides to Edith so that way she can hand this out to everyone. And for parents, sometimes this feels frustrating, but we got to build positive relationship with the school itself and with the teachers, because if the relationship with the teacher is good and the parent and the teacher feels positively about you, it is far easier for them to feel positively about your child. Plan ahead, be consistent. I recognize time. You should be overtly engaged with your school. Here's an example. this is actually a letter that I wrote to a teacher and principal, not telling them necessarily who I was in relationship to my role, but dear such and such, we wanted to take a moment to express our gratitude after Brooks' wonderful first day. That's Brooks, my daughter. And I'm signaling to them that we appreciate how jovial she came home, which must have been about the environment that was in the school. And this is not just a letter, but it's a signal to them that, hey, Brooke has engaged parents that want to be, positively constructive and helpful, much as you do as teachers. There's a lot of medications for our variety of conditions that we're talking about. So we're not going to go through all of them. Although if somebody has a question about medications, you entirely can ask. And there are off-label uses. So just making sure. Oh, you should have a plan in terms of how you follow up with your provider. And the literature does show that, unfortunately, for those who identify as BIPOC or lower SES, adherence to treatment, adherence to follow-up is far less. And that's irrespective of if you have a provider of color or not. So we try to have systems that are mindful of that. But we're at 8 past, and I want you all to have as much time to ask questions. So I'm gonna stop sharing.
I thank you so much, Dr. Simon. This is so much important and useful information. We want to get as many questions as we can. What I am going to ask, and I'm talking slower, is that if you have a question for Dr. Simon, please raise your hand. I know that there are questions that pertain specifically to the district. We do have special ed leadership here, and we would like to ask them questions as well. But I want to start off by making sure that we are using Dr. Simon's time effectively. I did see one hand up.
Oh, and Edith, I just want to share 3 slides. Folks can take a picture of these. They're clinical resources that are available. I spoke to each organization, and so take a screenshot. Again, I'm going to send this to Edith. So the Baker Center, around Mission Hill, they currently have ample space and availability to engage persons who are anywhere from 2 to 18. And what do? Outpatient behavioral health services. And they service Boston, Waltham, and they do have telehealth opportunities. So the Baker Center, Center for Effective Therapy, that's number 1. So if folks want to take a screenshot, they can. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Next one is the computer wants to freeze. The next one's going to be Children's Services of Roxbury. Oh, it went away. Well, Edith, I'm going to get you the 3. So it's the Baker Center is number 1. 2 is Children's Services of Roxbury, and then 3 is the Italian Home for Children. So Baker Center, Children's Services of Roxbury, Italian Home for Children, and each one of them has space right now actively for kids. Oh, here we go. Computer wanted to be better. Okay, so here's the Children's Services of Roxbury. If folks want to take a screenshot. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then Italian Home for Children. If folks want to take a screenshot. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And those 3 organizations do provide therapeutic services, do provide individual therapy, do provide clinicians that can diagnose conditions like autism spectrum disorder, as well as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And now I'm going to yield to folks that might have questions.
Thank you so much again, Dr. Simon. So this is our question and answer period. There was one person, I see your hand, Sonia. We had one person who raised their hand. If you're still interested, I didn't get your name. I apologize. I know it started with a Y. If you are still interested in asking your question, I want to make sure I honor that time. I do have Lexi Patero, who is one of our SpEdPAC board members. Lexi, can you raise your hand? Who has been helping us with the chat. So she's my partner in this Q&A session and helping me just making sure that we identify those who have questions. And so I'm going to start with Sonia. Sonia, would you unmute yourself and ask Dr. Simon your question, please?
Gracias, buenas noches. Mi pregunta es, si un niño, ya un ejemplo, el mío tiene 17 años y él se niega a beber la medicación, ¿qué pasaría para el doctor?
She said, my child is 17 years old and refuses to take their medication. What would a doctor suggest?
Yeah, so this is not uncommon. And one, Sonia, thank you for asking your question because many others here likely have the same question. So for your late adolescence, so someone who's 16, 17, transitional age adult, 18, 19, the strong encouragement would be enhancing your son and provider relationship, because there are times, and I engage young people who initially do not want to take any medication, and it may be for any number of reasons. Is it mom or dad that's trying to force me to take the medication? Do I not recognize what the benefits would be of the medication? But I can say that with a positive patient-provider relationship, it could be that your son could be someone that eventually does take medication. Also, something that happens far too commonly, patients can be prescribed inappropriate doses of medication, and when they've tried it, they've had a negative experience, be that a headache or a side effect that wasn't tolerable to them. And if the provider isn't hearing that and just keeps thinking, well, let me just keep prescribing the same dose, that's also negative. So I've had patients come to me on a stimulant and they say they didn't like it, come to realize when I do some calculations, like, oh, this dose was actually too high, let's adjust the dose, and the patient takes it. So you have to really educate, well, the provider has to really educate the patient about what to expect with the medication. Because if I don't tell you that you might experience something and then it happens to you.
Dr. Simon, do you mind if I interrupt you for a second? I'm sorry. We have an interpreter in the English channel and they're totally talking over you. So I just want to make sure that we resolve that.
No problem.
Thank you.
All right. I'm not sure which of the interpreters it was.
I
It
think
might,
it's the Vietnamese interpreter is talking now.
he's a male, so it's either Cantonese or Mandarin potentially. Can the Cantonese and Mandarin interpreters just make sure that you're in the correct channel? I'm just going to talk to you guys for a second while I go through those and then try to see if you're in your corresponding channel.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. And then Cantonese. Okay. I think it might be the Cantonese interpreter. So to our interpreters, just make sure that you're part of your channel right now. I'll double check if you happen to sign off or have any issues.
Yashi.
Thank you, Yashi.
Yashi, Sarah said the Cantonese
Okay.
interpreter said that they are in the Cantonese channel.
Dr.
Right.
Simon, do you want to continue so we can see if it's working now?
Yeah. So just acknowledge, I just wanted to just acknowledge that hopefully your son feels comfortable when he is engaging with the provider to help explain what his experience is and why he might not want to be taking the medication. So appreciate the question. And also this is not directly related to Sonia, but related to, I'm paying attention to the chat. So I gave 3 different organizations in part. Undoubtedly, there are people that have had experiences with any number of these organizations or any organization that I might not have named, like Boston Medical Center or Boston Children's Hospital or Franciscan Children's Hospital, and had a good or bad experience. And so just wanted to highlight that my referencing these organizations is to acknowledge that folks can, attempt to identify an organization that does work for them.
Thank you, Dr. Simon. I'm going to pivot to Lexi for the next question from the chat.
Hi, okay. So we have had a few questions coming in that are kind of, let's see, sorry. So the main question that we keep coming across, I think, is can you please talk about what resources are available in Boston for kids with ADHD or who are neurodivergent? And I think that you shared a few like specific places that they could go and a few tools for parents. But I'm wondering if you could share more from like what can we go to the school and ask for perspective?
Yeah.
So that's more of a district question in terms of what the schools offer. And we just want to make sure that we have that. Unless Dr. Simon, you want to talk about some of the partnerships that you provide to BPS, if that's something you could provide, and then we can pivot to the district around services that the district offers.
And before he begins, I just want to share with our team to raise your hand so that I could unmute you for the sake of this meeting. Thank you.
Yeah. So one first answer in reference to any parent in any school district. If you have a child that you have concerns about, one, obviously you should be able to engage the school system that you're in and the teacher that is engaging with your child the most. And in reference to legal rights that you have as a parent, if you have concerns related to neurodivergency, you are entitled as a parent to engage the school system, but we have school officials here, so they can describe to you exactly what it would be that they would need. But I know that there are pediatricians, developmental pediatricians, child psychiatrists that do help parents, write letters to schools when they're inquiring about, psychoeducational evaluations, and 504 requests or IEP requests if 504 plans are not successful. But the district is here able to provide more clarity to that.
So I'm going to pivot to Andrea Amador, who is in behavioral services. If you could share briefly some of the options parents have, whether it's partners working in behavioral health or direct service providers that are BPS employees. If you could sort of list out how parents can access those services and what the services are. And also if someone could put that information in the chat so parents could actually see it as you talk about it, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure. My name is Andrea Amador. I'm the Senior Director of Behavioral Health. I have the pleasure of working in partnership with Jenna Parafinsic from the Social Work Department, who is also on this call. So together, the school psychologists and the social workers work in partnership with our community mental health partners to provide a continuum of behavioral health services. So some of the services that could be accessed with the students that Dr. Simon has been sharing information with us about are Tier 2 groups. We do a variety of social skills and skill development groups at Tier 2 that students can participate in. We also do individual counseling, school psychologists do, social workers do, and we
a little slower, just a little slower, just for the interpreters. Thank you.
We also refer students and families who prefer to receive their services outside of school to our community mental health partners. We're very lucky in Boston Public Schools to have more than 20 mental health partners that provide services within our buildings when parents choose, or within the community. And Dr. Simon mentioned Children's Services of Roxbury, the Baker Center. We have Home for Little Wanderers. We have Arbor. We have, again, dozens of mental health partners that we can also refer Children's Hospital, that we can refer families to. And specifically for students who are struggling with ADHD, we do have executive functioning skill development that we can support them in.
Can you just tell Andrea which person should a parent contact within the school building to access those services?
In general, it would be the student support team. That's the team at school that's responsible for supporting students and their interventions. The teams can also, as they're talking with the IEP team, can bring up concerns that they have there as well, but all students have access to the SST and the services available there. So some of these interventions that I'm referring to are regular ed interventions available to all students.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go to iPhone. You've had your hand up. If you could unmute yourself. The name is just iPhone. If you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
Hi,
Hi.
my name is Cassandra, and my child was with the children's services in Roxbury, but after a while they say that the insurance doesn't cover for her to have the service. So I was just wondering, is there other place that accept like other insurance that she can, because I think she really need like she had a mentor to help her, but now she doesn't have it anymore. So I was just wondering, is there other place that, because she have master standard before, and after that they change it to family assistant. So I was just wondering if there's other place that take like the family assistant insurance.
Thank you.
So in reference to coverage, so insurance covers, and I'm going to speak very broadly, like, so Mass Health, which has many different forms of coverage. The, I guess, easiest way to figure out which organization accepts your plan would be to identify the contact resource of your health insurance plan, because they should, in theory, have a list of the organizations that accept their coverage. Alternatively, you could attempt to call many different behavioral health agencies, whether that's again, Children's Services, Italian Home, Home for Little Wanderers, but not knowing your specific plan, on your plans, the card for your plan, you would identify the contact and then inquire about the question that you just asked, being, where could my daughter receive services for behavioral health? And the plan should, in theory, be able to at least provide you a list of set places.
Great. Thank you so much. Dr. Simon, the next question is about medication. And there's a question of the pros and cons of medicating children, particularly young children around the age of 8 or 9 years old who have been diagnosed with ADHD. Would you respond about the pros and cons of medications?
Yeah, and by the way, within the chat, I put, and I'll just list it again. I put a ADHD parent medication guide from the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. So I just posted it again. In terms of the pros and cons, so let's say pro, if you have identified that your child needed an evaluation for ADHD, there's a good chance that there are symptoms present, whether that was the inattention or the difficulty engaging in school appropriately, engaging with peers appropriately. Any of the negative things that brought you to think to bring this to somebody's attention, like a pediatrician or a family doctor, there's a good chance that those symptoms could be improved. So that would be like the pro. In terms of the con rests in, I would say, communication with the provider and ensuring that the appropriate dose and medication is utilized. Because cons could be wrong dose results in headache. Wrong dose results in significant appetite suppression. Wrong dose results in worsening irritability. But right dose, right medication, improvement dramatically. Having ADHD not treated increases risk for later life substance use disorder. So managing ADHD appropriately decreases risk for substance use disorder. There's significant pros to managing ADHD appropriately. Academically, peer relationship, parental relationship, the child's well-being and how they feel for themselves. Is not uncommon that I might meet someone who's like, oh my gosh, why didn't I get this medication earlier? Because they're recognizing the positive benefits too. But again,
Thank you.
In the chat, there's a PDF that is specific to parents that talks about the pros and cons.
Thank you so much. There's one other question that I kind of overlook. I apologize. This is from the text, and then I'll go to the next live question. Dr. Simon, can you talk a little bit about the overlapping symptoms between ADHD and ASD? And how do clinicians make the distinctions? This is coming from a parent of a student with ASD and ADHD, and this parent is wondering which behaviors are which and whether that even matters.
So thank you for referencing that last part, whether that matters. If you've identified that your child has ADHD and ASD, there are symptom overlap. But classically, the hallmark symptom associated with ASD of note, which is on a spectrum, is the social reciprocity challenge. ADHD, that can show up, but it cannot show up. ASD, it's often present. And so in reference to chicken or the egg, which came first, if someone has both, managing both is necessary. And you can see improvements in one set of symptoms and not improvement in the other set of symptoms. So for instance, someone that has ADHD and ASD, neither turns off, but when the ADHD medication is active and available in the person's system, their attention is much better. That does not mean that their social reciprocity is better, but their attention is much better. Now, the medication for the ADHD, for instance, wears off and there's no medication targeting the ASD. You might start to see irritability. You might start to see them get stuck. We call it being concrete in thinking. So there are things that can show up that are both, but if you're managing, so for instance, if someone's on a medication like aripiprazole, which is great for irritability for ASD, the irritability will be improved, yet the attention might still be poor. So you do need to engage a provider in managing both sets of symptoms. And so I appreciate that person's question.
Thank you, Dr. Simon. I think we may have time for about 3 or 4 more questions. So we're going to see how many we can get in. We are very close to time. The next hand that's raised is from...
Sorry, Edith. I just see a comment that I think should get highlighted. So Sarika is acknowledging that food is medicine, and she's very accurate. No provider would be recommending, hey, you should eat 5 Guys every day, right? Like that's not ideal. It is good, no harm to those who engage 5 Guys. But in reference to like the treatment, all the treatment, medication, behavioral intervention, parent management are all tools in a toolbox. The truth of the matter is we have to use all of the toolbox. And so you should engage your child in sport and social activities. whether they have ASD or not, or ADHD or not. You should have them hopefully engage in some kind of team aspect activity. So it should not be that it's only medication or it's only naturopathic activity. It should be a collective, because it's a multimodal system that you're working with in terms of attention. Even outdoor activities for 2 hours at a time has actually been shown to improve ADHD. But now it'd be a little bit difficult to do some outdoor activities given the cold weather. But you should be multifaceted in trying to create a treatment plan, not just thinking one medication or two medications is going to be the end all be all.
Thank you. We have 3 hands raised. I'm going to try to get to you, Teresita, and then Diane and Anne Marie, and also in between some comments from the chat. If you could keep your question brief and specific, that would be helpful to make sure we get to everyone that has their hand raised, and also those who have been waiting for answers from the chat. So I'm going to turn it over to Teresita. Would you unmute and ask your question, please?
Hola, buenas noches. Yo tengo una específica con mi hijo. Lo que pasa es que en mi casa, acá con nosotros, él tiene un comportamiento perfecto. Él es manejable, él es calmado, él es un niño muy lógico, él da sus argumentos, él es muy calmado, él nunca se exaspera, a diferencia de la escuela. La escuela, realmente el manejo que le dio la escuela no fue el adecuado y tuve que recurrir a Massachusetts para que lo remitieran. Ellos lo remitieron al neuropsicólogo diciendo que él necesitaba una evaluación, porque si Boston Public School está especializado para poder diagnosticar en lo que el niño realmente necesita, la escuela y los especialistas no fueron capaces de manejar la situación de mi hijo específicamente. Y me tocó a mí pelear y discutir con todo el mundo y llegar hasta los últimos estamentos para poder que realmente tuviera la ayuda que necesito en este momento para mi hijo. Y aún mi hijo lleva 2 semanas en la casa y no he podido encontrar la ayuda que necesita.
I didn't hear any interpretation.
I got it, Edith.
Okay.
She said, at home, my child is well behaved, calm, very logical, well mannered, unlike school. She said she had to get a neuropsych evaluation to properly diagnose the student. She's saying that in the last 2 weeks, she hasn't been able to get the help that she needs. I'm not really sure as to what she's referring to, but that's what she shared.
Thank you. Dr. Simon?
I didn't necessarily hear a question, I heard comments. I guess I would ask, or I would suggest that she engage the school that she's at or her child is at. And if she can share that, I would suspect that there are school officials here that would want to be helpful.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think in the interest of time, we do have to let the interpreters go at 8:30. So unfortunately, with 2 minutes to go, we do have to end. We do want those who have their hands up to get their questions answered. So if you would be kind enough to put your question in the chat along with your contact information, your email, we assure you that we will get a response for you. We look at the chat and we'll answer all of the questions, but unfortunately we do have to close. Our interpreters are done at 8:30. So I want to thank you so much, Dr. Simon, for your time, for your knowledge, for wisdom. I think we're going to have to invite you back so that we can continue this really important, critical discussion. And thank you for all the service and the support and the programming and partners that you provide for our children in order to address mental health issues throughout the city of Boston. We really appreciate you. And if we can just kind of give a clap or a virtual, thank you to Dr. Simon, that would be great. I'm going to turn it over. And I also want to thank Lexi, who has been monitoring the chat, who has been really helpful, our SpEdPAC board member, with facilitating this meeting. I'm going to turn it over to our illustrious interim chair, Bethany Moffi, who is going to close us out.
Thank you, Edith. Thank you so much. Great job facilitating, and thank you, Dr. Simon, so much for this well put together and valuable presentation. We'll so look forward to the slides that you share and sharing them out with the community. The last person who asked the question, please put your name in the chat with your email and your question again. We'll wait a couple of minutes after we close the meeting just to make sure we have your information, and we will send it to someone in the district to get your question answered. That's the last person who asked the question, who Joshi interpreted the question from Spanish. Put your name and your question and your email in the chat, and we'll get an answer for you. Again, thank you, everybody, to all the families who came out. We know that you're taking time away from your families to be here. Thank you to all the district people who came and joined to support and give information. And once again, for Dr. Simon, thank you so much for the presentation. And look for our newsletter and information on our website for our next meeting. It's February, and I believe the date is the 27th, and the topic is dyslexia. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, interpreters. Thank you, Joshi, for keeping us organized. Thank you, everybody.
Are you ready to close out?
Thank you.
So,
Okay.
thank
Good night, everyone.
Hang on for just a minute, Joshi, so that person can put her question and everything in the chat.
Okay.
We'll hang out for a little bit.
Yeah, and good night, everybody. Thank you so much.
Good night. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Simon.